The Senate is resumed.
Order 11, sir. Order number 11, the name of the Honour Leader of the Senate, and which has been assigned to Senator the Honourable Dr. Monroe Knight, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with the provisions of the Special Loans Act, Chapter 105, the borrowing by the Government of Barbados of the sum of Barbados $100 million by way of two loans, each of approximately Barbados $50 million from the OPEC Fund for International Development, on the terms and conditions contained in the agreement, the main provisions of which are set out in the schedule for the purpose of financing the program to strengthen social services in Barbados. Two.
Senator Dr. the Honourable Chantal Monroe Knight.
Mr. President, I want to beg your indulgence to ask that items on the order paper, items number 11 and 12, be taken as a cognate, since both relate to loans under the Special Loans Act, Cap 105.
The question is that items 11 and 12, both resolutions related to the Special Loans Act, Cap 105, be taken as a cognate debate. All of the senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The next, the ayes have it. We will take this as a cognate debate. Please ensure that you speak to both items in the introduction.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me take this opportunity, as others have done, to welcome, first of all, Senator Dr. Connell. Well, I did not know Senator Connell either as a schoolmate or otherwise colleague, but I've had sufficient interactions with Dr. Connell to know, Senator Dr. Connell, to know that he is ultimate professional, extremely responsive, but also as well has a heart for the very profession that he is in, and I'm sure that he will make an excellent contribution to the Senate. I also as well want to welcome, of course, our Senator Tate. What would we do without her biting commentary? I will say no more. And of course, Senator Dr. Crystal Drakes. Again, like everybody else, really, really strong contributions. Senator Drakes and I both having a passion and work in the areas of sustainable development and climate change. Often had very good conversations and debates around those issues as well, and of course her very thoughtful interventions, which makes for an extremely strong and robust Senate, and we of course want to wish her, and I certainly personally want to wish her every success as she moves forward. Mr. President, the two resolutions before us, one, as we've heard before, in relation to the borrowing of the government of Barbados, the sum of Barbados $100 million by the way of two loans, approximately $50 million each from the OPEC Fund for International Development. And the second one, a loan in the amount of $313.6 million from China Sinopharm International Corporation to provide for the financing, 80% financing, Mr. President, for the design and construction, first of all, one building with an outpatient clinic, a patient ward, a burn unit, and a laboratory center known as the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Enmore Site Extension, Lot 1 project. And secondly, one building with an oncology center, an administration office, and an outside works known as the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Enmore Site Extension Lot 2 project, Mr. President. And those are the resolutions, those are the amounts that we will debate in the resolution that the government is seeking to be able to borrow. Mr. President, we always ask, how do we finance development? How do small island developing states seek to finance development. Finance the critical needs of its citizens, because that's what development is. It is not just only about the infrastructure, but it is about making sure that a government can have the sufficient finances that it needs in order to be able to make sure that those critical needs, education, health care, food security, are sufficiently financed. But at the same time, Mr. President, as the government seeks to be able to do so, it doesn't have finite resources in order, on its own, infinite resources in order to be able to do so. So a responsible government must make sure that it can mobilize those resources in a strategic way, in a responsible way, Mr. President. Not to borrow when it can't even pay salaries, not to borrow in a way continuously that the government runs itself into a situation in which you have lost confidence internationally, Mr. President, in which no one wants to lend you money, but you have to borrow in a way that allows you to be able to balance, one, the needs, and with a level of fiscal prudence. And that is what this government has a record of doing, Mr. President, and that is what this government is intent on doing. Mr. President, any of us who've gone to a financial institution, we had some young people in here earlier, Mr. President, many of them will want to either take out mortgages, go for car loans, or more importantly, start a business. When you go to a banking institution, you don't always have all of the resources, unless you're very rich, and I don't know if we have any very rich senators in this honorable chamber. Everybody is looking to one side of the chamber. Everybody is looking to one side of the chamber. Oh, clearly all the attention is on the independent and the opposition side. Independently wealthy. Independently wealthy. But unless you are independently wealthy, when you go to the bank to borrow, they look at a number of different metrics, Mr. President. They look at your track record, the extent to which you have a history of repaying, the extent to which you have a history of saving, to which you are in good standing, that there aren't people on record who are saying that you have bad debt. They look, yes, at your ability to repay over the long term based on your positioning, your prospects, your current salary, all of those things, Mr. President, in order to judge the extent to which you are a good investment for them to loan. That also applies as well, Mr. President, national level. When we go to borrow as a country, people examine the extent to which Barbados is a good investment. They look at the extent to which we are able to repay. They look at the growth trajectory and what has been happening within the country, Mr. President. They look at our GDP to debt ratio, Mr. President. So they look at all of those metrics and say, is Barbados a good investment? And clearly, Mr. President, despite those that would want to distort facts and run counter-narratives, Mr. President, Barbados is on a solid growth trajectory, Mr. President, such that we have clawed all the way back from the 23 downgrades to a country now that has continued, Mr. President, a path in which our grades are continually to move up and up and up by our international partners, by those that do the credit rating, Mr. President. Mr. President, the metrics would show, again, that when you look at our debt to GDP ratio, Mr. President, we would agree. And again, the statistics would show, Mr. President, we have this last central bank report, the last quarter central bank report, again, to show that we have a healthy debt to GDP ratio, a healthy fiscal balance. And that is why, Mr. President, that there is a level of confidence that Barbados remains a good investment for others to be able to lend us, because they understand that, again, we have the track record and we have the fiscal space, and that our growth trajectory is such that when they look at it, Barbados can continue to repay. Mr. President, over the period of this government, as we heard in the other place, we've borrowed some $7.34 billion, but Mr. President, we've repaid. We have repaid. We have not reneged. There's no one running us down, Mr. President, to say you have not paid, Mr. President, at a national level. In fact, again, we have repaid $9.346 billion, Mr. President. We are repaying our debt and are in our position to continue to be able to repay our debt, Mr. President. That is important. It is also important to realize, Mr. President, and again, the debate around how much we borrow, what is the level of debt, and all of that is important, yes. But we must also contextualize the discussion. When this government came in, we didn't come in, Mr. President, on a wicket that was battling smoothly. We came in on a wicket that had some lumps, Mr. President, that was throwing us some curveballs, Mr. President, in which the ball was swinging, Mr. President. And we have had wicket bouncers, and we have had to address and play catch up and repair, Mr. President. We came in a country that was on its knees financially, on its knees, socially as well, Mr. President. No investment happening in education, in the health sector, no buses, no garbage vans, trucks, no garbage trucks, enough garbage on the road, and sewage. All of that, Mr. President, having to be able to clean up and address, even at which we faced, Mr. President, empty coffers. Mr. President, we faced a situation during COVID in which our GDP contracted by 18%, Mr. President. 18%. We face a global environment, even now, that is extremely unfriendly, in which, again, the space for us to be able to borrow, again, is shrinking. In which development assistance, Mr. President, is also contracting. So the playing field for us to be able to mobilize resources, Mr. President, is constrained. Is constrained. So the wicket and context must be laid. Mr. President, even as I say that, the government is not seeking to absolve itself from its responsibility as a government to be able to address fundamentally the needs of its citizens. We don't. We are the government that faces it and fixes it, Mr. President. Does that mean that everything is perfect? It doesn't, Mr. President. There is still much to be done, Mr. President. There is still much to be done. There is still infrastructure to be taken care of. There's still much to be done to transform education. And again, healthcare, as we would come to, Mr. President. Roads to be fixed. But, Mr. President, I built my house from the ground up, my husband and I. And anybody who has built their house from the ground up knows that when you are building, there is heavy initial investment. You have to spend lots of money in the foundation, building those walls, and then the roof. So that there are moments in that process of building in which the investment is extremely heavy. But you recognize that you make that investment because you understand that when you make that investment, it stays for the long term. You stay for the long term. And then you move into a phase in which, Mr. President, you can maintain. We are still a government that is seeking to rebuild, Mr. President, after the wicket that we have had. And in that way, the government, like I said, has to be able to balance its ability to mobilize local resources, again, that it was a constrained private sector, as well that the government still has to be able to lift up and help. That is the nature of small economies, Mr. President. We do not have a large private sector. A large private sector that we can then say, okay, the private sector will do it. The private sector will be able to mobilize the sufficient resources and to be able to invest, particularly in those areas in social development. It doesn't. In other countries, you may have that, but not in small open economies, and certainly not here in Barbados. Across the world, Mr. President, there is that debate about who should be doing the level of investment in social development. Mr. President, very often we do not have a choice. This government has said and stood behind its mandate that we will treat the critical and urgent needs of our population, Mr. President. We've said that in our manifestos, we've said that publicly, and that is a commitment that we intend to keep, Mr. President. But also as well, there must be a recognition that that investment must be funded. It must be funded, Mr. President. We are a country, unlike many others, in which we provide free primary and secondary, free primary and secondary schooling, Mr. President. That means something. In which children have access to lunches, Mr. President. In which the elderly can board buses, Mr. President, and don't have to pay because the government subsidizes it, Mr. President. At the tertiary level, when we came in as a government, when the government before us had thrown their hands up in the air when faced with the question of how do we finance development, and said we do not have a clue. What you want me to do? And they borrowed and then cut. Cut tertiary education. And we are a government, even within the constrained environment that we had, the constrained fiscal space, that said, this is not right. Fundamentally and philosophically, we know who Barbados is, we know what we stand for, and therefore we would make the necessary correction. And that is an investment that we continue to make, Mr. President. We all know, again, Transport Board subsidized, Barbados Water Authority. So there is an investment that has to be made in all of these things. And if we are facing a constrained global environment in which development assistance is constrained, if we are facing a space that is constrained, again, because we have a growing private sector that is not yet able to make the level of heavy investment that is needed for the social sector, government has to be able to step in. And one of the ways that it has to be able to step in, as I said, is to make sure that we borrow responsibly. That we borrow responsibly. And that is essentially what this government has been doing. And that borrowing has allowed us, Mr. President, to be able to address, again, some of those critical things. We now have these wonderful air-conditioned buses that are there, some of them grants, but some of them as well financed, Mr. President, through loans, IDB loans. Recently, Mr. President, we would have passed a resolution, again, for borrowing from CAF, that again in the healthcare sector allowed us to be able to refurbish 7 polyclinics and 2 new built for purpose polyclinics as well. That is investment, Mr. President, that is needed. That is investment, Mr. President, that is needed. And again, we always think of these things as high economics, but we practice them too at home. You have a little bit of money in the bank, and you make a choice about whether or not you will put all of that money into the thing that you want, or you look at what you have and say, listen, I have a little bit of fiscal space, let me go to the credit union and then borrow twice this amount, so that I keep what I have there in case of a rainy day, but I borrow because I know that I can repay, Mr. President. We do that at the individual level, Mr. President. And this government is saying, we know that we can repay. What we need to do in terms of that heavy investment Mr. President, we will be able to make sure that we balance. In the case of the loan from the China Sinopharm, that is funding 80%. 80% the government is putting in 20%, Mr. President, in order then to be able to address critical needs in the healthcare sector. Mr. President, there is not a Barbadian who would say that everything is working well within the healthcare sector. There's not a Barbadian. But you say that, and again, we're not the government that will say, put our hands in the air. And Mr. President, let's be honest here. We've heard in this chamber that it is that season. And we could have said, is that season? Why put ourselves up to the critique of the debt and the loans and say, okay, we'll leave it. But we haven't. We've come to this chamber, to the other chamber, because, again, to do the work and the hard work, Mr. President, to put ourselves up to the scrutiny because we understand the long-term trajectory of development that we are committed to, Mr. President. So we are not leaving it. We're not taking the safe road and say, don't bring it. Mr. President, it has to be done, and this government will get it done, Mr. President. That is our commitment. And we started that work in relation to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, so that this loan is not something that we're saying is going to fix all of the problems at the QEH. That is not the intent. The problems at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and there are those who are more expert than I am, so I will tread very carefully here. But what I can say to you, as somebody who understands a little bit of process and management, that the challenges are complex. When you are fixing or attempting to address the challenges within the healthcare sector, that is, again, so wide and has to provide for so many needs, the problems and how we apply fixes to them, Mr. President, also as well have to be nuanced and multi-layered, Mr. President. It is not just a one-off fix, and the investment has to be channeled through number of different ways in order to address over time. At the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, I know that there have been systemic reviews looking at those challenges and how they can be fixed, Mr. President. I know that on an ongoing basis, even within the A&E, that there is monitoring that happens, Mr. President, right now, that we've introduced personnel that on a day-to-day basis, their job, Mr. President, is to look at the challenges. Look at the challenges and be able to examine how we fix, how we change. Look at targets, how much throughput we want for patients, Mr. President. That is because we are aiming to fix, Mr. President. I know, Mr. President, because one of the other portfolios that I handle within the Prime Minister's office is also as well helping our Prime Minister to look at the public service. I know that from the last estimates, Mr. President, that one of the things that the personnel from the Ministry of Health said to us is that we need more human resources. We just don't have sufficient expertise in the right areas in order then to address the challenges. And the Prime Minister committed that we will either, one, establish new posts for the hospital, the Ministry of Health, but also as well make sure that we can extend critical posts, again, to fulfill some of those human resources. And all of that, Mr. President, needs to be financed. And we have done so. Certainly, Mr. President, again, on a day-to-day basis, I get requests from the public service to be able to extend posts. The Prime Minister would establish posts. And I can tell you that for the Ministry of Health and as well for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, that we have been doing so in terms of making sure that those posts are established and extended, Mr. President. In particular, when we look, Mr. President, at this particular loan, and you note again that one of the critical areas that it would seek to be able to do is the establishment of an oncology center, Mr. President. And again, those who are more expert can speak to the seriousness of cancer in Barbados. And really and truly, we've heard the challenges that we've had in terms of making sure that we had a linear accelerator. that would be here and on island in order then to be able to make sure that we service those patients. Under this loan, we will actually have, Mr. President, a state-of-the-art oncology center that would have a second linear accelerator to add to the one that was just recently, Mr. President, established. And I heard as well that patients are already being treated from that first linear accelerator, Mr. President. I know that the QEH as well is attempting to make sure that it also as well takes care of not just the patients, but also all of the staff. That there are plans to introduce a gym, Mr. President, and a nursery, so that the staff can feel comfortable that their children are being taken care of, Mr. President. Under this loan, we would establish a burn unit, because previously, the burn unit was decommissioned. I can call it that, Mr. President, decommissioned. It was there, then it wasn't there. Mr. President, if I get into under which administration it was decommissioned, we'll have a different conversation. But anyhow, this government is getting it done. And you would see then that under this loan, the establishment again of a burn unit. And Mr. President, like I said, this is just one aspect. This loan, critical intervention for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in order to make sure that we again can seek to build out the modern, front-facing, front-serving health sector that we need. The government, under the Ministry of Health, has sought to establish within there a minister whose primary function, Mr. President, is to make sure that we address the issues of health and wellness and how people move and how people eat and exercise. Actually, Mr. President, there's a challenge going on that was sent to me, Mr. President. You're supposed to do, I think it is, how much it is, 50 push-ups, 50 push-ups straight, and then do 40 squats. 40 squats, and it's been sent to our parliamentarians.
Easy work.
It's been sent to all parliamentarians, Mr. President, to make sure that we are moving and healthy. And again, Mr. President, to deal with the issues of, again, non-communicable diseases and how we treat to that. So a full 360. And again, Mr. President, again, I've said it. There's no intent for us to be able to say that we are perfect, that there are still not problems. But what we are saying is that we are resolute in making sure that as a government, we're able to find the resources as much as we can in a balanced and responsible way. And this loan has that fundamental intent, Mr. President, of being able to address some very critical areas that have been identified in relation to the QEH. Mr. President, the second loan, which is from the OPEC Fund for International Development, is what is called a policy-based loan. So while the loan that I spoke about before from China was a loan that was specifically targeted for the QEH. So that money has to go into the areas that were specifically identified and are specifically identified in the schedule. This loan is a policy-based loan. What a policy-based loan, Mr. President, does is that it gives the government the opportunity to apply the resources, in this case, specifically within the social sector. But it doesn't specifically say in which area, but it gives the government the ability to be able then to look and see where the critical needs are and then be able to apply. One of the challenges that we have very often with partners that we work with for loans and development cooperation is that each partner has their own either what we call prior actions, structural benchmarks, all of these things that you have to be able to meet. And it can take quite a little bit of manpower to be able to monitor. With this particular loan, what the partners here have said is, listen, we looked at your portfolio. We see what you're doing in the area of social services. And rather than develop a whole new set of metrics that you would have to follow, we would allow you to apply that money to the social services sector using the metrics from another partner, in this case, the IDB, in order then to be able to make sure there's accountability. Under that IDB facility in particular, Mr. President, the IDB provided support in two specific areas. One, in terms of helping the government to build capacity around gender and its gender policies, and two, in assisting the government as it seeks to amalgamate our social services in order to increase efficiency, Mr. President. And that is an ongoing program that is happening, and of course something like that brings together welfare, the child care board, all of these various agencies is something that again will take quite a significant investment, and therefore these allocations of funds, Mr. President, will allow us to be able to do so. In the case, Mr. President, of the funds that are allocated, again, in relation to the 313.6 million, we would note, Mr. President, that it indicates, again, in the schedule, Part 1 and Part 2, again, that we have a term of 14 years with a 4-year moratorium, Mr. President. 4 years moratorium, again, and then with the interest rate here at 3.5%, payable semi-annually, Mr. President, in both cases. And then, Mr. President, as well, in the case of the two loans that we have for the OPEC Fund for International Development, we would know that we have a term of 20 years, again with a grace period, Mr. President, of 5 years, Mr. President, a grace period of 5 years, Mr. President. And again, when we look at the interest rates, Mr. President, we would see that those interest rates are extremely, Mr. President, I would say extremely favorable. In the first instance, we have a fixed, not variable, fixed interest rate of 3.0% per annum, payable semi-annually, Mr. President. And then, I know in the other place, the minister who presented the resolution, the minister responsible for finance, was talking about the mortgage rate. Here, the mortgage rate being almost similar to what we have for an international loan, Mr. President, at 3-point-something%. You can hardly go anywhere now and get that for a major investment. And we have been able to make sure that we have negotiated that. The best rates for the level of investment that we need. Mr. President, it is difficult. And I make no pains about that. I know that it is difficult as a country, as ordinary citizens, to always see all the parts and how they fit together. I know that there is concern, again, about how much the government is borrowing, Mr. President. And that is fair. A conscious population needs to be invested. If the population was not interested, if they were not commenting on what government is doing, then we would question the level of accountability and whether or not we had a citizenry that understood its role in our democratic process. But we have that. But also as well, we say, one, that there is ultimate transparency. Ultimate transparency. The government does not have anything to hide. All of these loans that the government has taken, you will find, again, on Parliament website. You look in our estimates, you would see the history of those transactions, Mr. President, there. And also, we have clear outputs to show in terms of the monies that we have borrowed and what we have borrowed for and what they have delivered for people. What they have delivered for people, Mr. President. Mr. President, with those few words, I am obliged and I beg that this bill... Sorry, amendment this resolution. Pardon? Be now passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Myron Knight. Senator Walters.
Good evening, Mr. President. First, let me join with all the other senators to congratulate and welcome Senator Dr. Connell and welcome back Senator Tate, and to also wish former Senator Drates well in her endeavors. Mr. President, when Barbados hears that the government is borrowing more money, it is a deep concern to them. They have acknowledged that it is a concern. Senator Monroe Knight said that she knows it's a concern about borrowings publicly. There's a concern about the level of debt and the level of borrowing, and there's also a concern about the level of truth as it relates to these borrowings and this debt. It was said by the Minister of Finance, and it was echoed again in here today by Senator Monroe Knight, that they, since June 2018, actually I will elaborate on it because Senator Monroe Knight, she rushed through some of these details. But it was said by the Minister that the government, since June 2018, or I say that the government between June 2018 and September 2025 borrowed 7.341 billion Barbados dollars. It was said by the Minister of Finance that between June 2018 and September of 2025 that the government paid $9.643 billion of debt. Mr. President, at June 2018, the gross public sector debt, as per the Central Bank, was $16.065 billion. If you add the money borrowed by this government, $7.34 billion, and you subtract the money that the government claimed to have paid or repaid, $9.643 billion, the result is $13.763 billion. The Central Bank report at September 2025 shows gross public sector debt at $14.876 billion, Mr. President. That is a gap of $1.1 billion based on this government's assertions of what they borrowed and what they paid. So two things, Mr. President. Either the government borrowed more than they're saying, or they repaid less than they're saying. But regardless of the situation, Mr. President, there must come an answer to this difference, because it is a material difference when you compare the results or what has been reported by the Central Bank and what has been said by the Minister, and in here this today about what the government borrowed and what the government repaid during June 2018 and September 2025. That's the first thing that I would say, Mr. President. Mr. President, people are scared of the debt because they are concerned that their children and their children's children will be burdened and saddled with a heavy debt burden. And while everyone would agree that we have to borrow for development, we have to borrow in our personal lives, we got to borrow a vehicle loan, we borrow to build our homes, we borrow some of this for our children's education, it doesn't negate the fact that this level of borrowing and the way and how this government is treating to the borrowing is not sustainable for our future generations. Mr. President, as of 2024, December, as reported in the estimates, approved estimates 2025 to 2026. There are $2.1 billion of loans that the government received since coming to office. And the balance on those loans, Mr. President, is still $2.1 billion. The government of Barbados, the Barbados Labour Party-led government, is borrowing money, and they are not repaying the money that they are borrowing. The government of Barbados, Mr. President, earlier this year, when debt became due for payment, this same government borrowed $1 billion Barbados dollars to repay that debt. And that debt was debt that they took out in 2019, Mr. President. So that is why people are concerned, and that is why people are saying they're kicking the can down the road for another government to deal with down the road, for future generations to deal with down the road, which is fine, but it is the extent of what they are doing, Mr. President. So the Senator Monroe Knight has a few notes, but I don't think she really understands what she's saying, Mr. President. 20 minutes to rush through her notes, but she's not explaining to Barbados that this is strategically not going to work in the benefit of our future generations. Mr. President, the two loans, the resolution speaks to two loans. One that will build an extension of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And who would not welcome an extension of the hospital? Who would not welcome improvements to the hospital? I don't think no one will not welcome that, Mr. President. But the use of funds, how this government is using money, is their concern. Because, Mr. President, in February of 2020, this government announced that it will be using a facility in St. Lucie as a quarantine center during COVID. And they pledged $1.5 million, it was reported then, to do retrofitting and so forth of this facility. In November 2021, Mr. President, it was also reported that the government got a loan for $120 million for that facility in St. Lucie, Mr. President. In April of 2022, this same government said they will convert that facility into something that will deal with medical tourism facility, yes. The Prime Minister made that statement in April of 2022. In June of 2024, that same facility in St. Lucie was used as a satellite medical facility for the Cricket World Cup, Mr. President. So fine, the government comes, brought a resolution, brought $120 million, and everyone can be satisfied to this point that the taxpayers are benefiting from this facility. No questions. You spent money, got us through COVID. You're going to refurbish or upgrade to deal with medical tourism facility. You have used it for a satellite medical facility in Cricket World Cup to give support to our existing medical, if anything happened at the facility. But in July 2025, we could now learn that this facility is being used to house workers for a construction site. $120 million after. But you come to this chamber to borrow $316 million. And I can guarantee you that $120 million has not been repaid. It is a debt on the books of this government. It is a debt will be burdened by the taxpayers of this country, who has to repay this debt. But no, you come to borrow $360 million. Fine, we want the expansion of the of the hospital. We want the expansion of the hospital. But you're throwing away money. The government has thrown away $120 million down St. Lucie. And I repeat for clarity, in February of 2020, they refurbished the site for COVID. In November of 2021, they borrowed $120 million to refurbish and finish, make it fit for purpose. In April of 2022, they promised they will convert it to a medical tourism facility. In June 2024, it was used as a backup facility for the Cricket World Cup. And a year later, it is housing construction workers who are building hotels in this country. That is how our taxpayers' dollars are misused, mismanaged, abused. So we have to pay the $120 million for construction workers to be sleeping in when the night come. But we now have to come and approve $316 million for the expansion of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. This is not adding up, Mr. President. If there is some great legitimate reason that the government thinks that they can respond to or share with the public, we would love to hear it. But this, with the naked eye, cannot be the best use of our finances, especially borrowed money. Mr. President, in 2018, the government also, when they came to office, they instituted what was called, or is called, the Health Service Contribution Levy. And I see some smiles on this side of the... Mr. President, the Health Services Contribution Levy, one would think that it would put at the disposal of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital resources to improve the facility, whether operationally, whether it is facility-driven, equipment, etc. This is a new tax introduced in 2018. It did not exist before. Its sole purpose is to take a piece of an employee's earnings and transfer that contribution to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital annually by check or transfer. Sole purpose. In this Health Service Contribution Levy, it is reported that in 2022, Queen Elizabeth Hospital reported that in 2022, they collected $61 million from this levy. Between 2018 and 2022, unemployment rate in Barbados, as per this government, was around 9%. Today, it is reported that unemployment is just over 6%, meaning more persons are employed. If more persons are employed, Mr. President, the amount of contributions going into the Health Service Contribution Levy is increasing if the government is being honest and truthful. At a bare minimum, Mr. President, over the last 7 years, this government would have received $427 million from workers in this country. Not taxpayers, not people that are going to the grocery and buy goods and services that may not be working or that may not be paying national insurance, but persons that are paying national insurance. $427 million at least in the last 7 years. And based on the unemployment figures and the increase in employment based on this government, you could estimate that they're well over $500 million over the last 7 years. But again, we are asked now to be burdened with another loan to do something with the QEH. So taxpayers has contributed directly, the workers directly at least $500 million, $500 million over the last 7 years. They will now contribute another $300 million in this loan, plus interest, with this loan for about 14 years. This is wrong. There's no better way to put it. It is wrong that we are contributing, and this government is mismanaging the money. Where are the improvements at the QEH? And they're laughing because they want to come now with a cheap political narrative. That's what they want to do, the cheap political narrative. But look at the state of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And I will leave it for the persons or doctors who wish to speak on the improvements. Because we want the hospital to work well. But this is wrong. To ask workers to contribute significant amount of money. You do not see an improvement in the facility. You do not see an improvement in the service. And then you are now turning around asking them to borrow $300 million to build an extension to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And then the government has thrown away $120 million in St. Lucie. Because they want a hotel built. There's no laughing matter, Mr. President. They laugh because they believe that because they can go and get a loan, that Barbados is doing well. We're not doing well because you're going to get a loan. You're going to get a loan because you need the loan. And the people that are borrowing money are going to make money. So when you hear about all of this, people are excited about investing in Barbados. They are making a return on the backs of Barbadians for the money to be parked somewhere in a bank, in some instances, so that we can gloat that we have high foreign reserves in this country, but paying interest payments every single year, close to $1 billion a year of taxpayers' money. And that money is parked and not working to the benefit of this country. And when you come now to the social services, when the government borrows to pay for healthcare, welfare, education, or any other social services, it means that they're not earning enough money to pay for them, Mr. President. So all of this talk that Senator Monroe Knight is talking about, healthy fiscal balance, if we had a healthy fiscal balance, we would not be here borrowing money for social services. We would not be, and the fact of the matter is that there is a policy-based loan. We do not know how this money is going to be spent.
Correct. You're in trouble.
We do not know how this money is going to be spent. Is it going to be spent in the National Cultural Foundation to pay back for Carrie Festa? Mr. President, we do not know. Is it going to be spent for regathering? We do not know, Mr. President. So it's okay to come here with a couple notes and talk about the debt, the GDP and all these things, Mr. President. It is much deeper than that. It is the wastage that the taxpayers are experiencing from this government. Mr. President, the government still has to borrow at least another $600 million to finance its fiscal deficit. More borrowing. The government is now going to be faced with a dilemma where, from as early as next year, a lot of these loans that they borrowed will now become due for payment. So they will not have the luxury of cash flow because the debt becomes due, like how the debt became due for the 2019 bond this year, and they had to borrow money to pay back that and the IMF. So what will happen next year, Mr. President? Will they borrow more money to pay back the the current debt that they have, and we will be going nowhere. We have to start to repay our debts, Mr. President. We have to. $2.1 billion untouched. Money probably spent, used up, as at 2024 December. And that does not include the $1 billion they borrowed so far for this year. So when we come to look at the resolutions, sometimes we have to go beyond the purpose of the debt. Because yes, we want the facility at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital to be improved. We want those additional services. We want the operations at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital to be working in the best interests of Barbadians. We want to save lives. But do not disguise it by disguise your mismanagement of the finances of this country by bringing these resolutions. The government has a lot to answer to when it comes to the mismanagement of funds. We know about hope. I'm not going to get into the 60 to $80 million in hope that we have no answers to up to today. I'm not going to get into the $50 million at Comey. And Comey has not done nothing substantial since the refurbishment other than whole football tournaments and the usual fact. And this Senate will be here next year during the estimates to approve a subvention for Comey, which is taxpayers' money again going to fund that operation. So we're not seeing a change in this country. So if the senator can tell us, the chamber, the $7.341 billion that they claim they borrowed, point us to where we can go and see some of this money. Point us. I am very serious. It is not for my benefit only. It is for the benefit of the people of Barbados who are concerned with these numbers. I already shared that if I looked at the central bank reports, based on the minister's statements, the numbers are not adding up how they should. If I take the debt at June 2018, I add what they said they borrowed, I subtract what they said they repaid, it gives me a difference of $1.1 billion. That needs to be explained to the people of this country. Mr. President, we must not fool ourselves. And quite often, this government focuses on what comes out on paper, but is not really the reality of the livelihoods of people in this country. And we must be vigilant. And we must question this government on their spending, on their borrowing, on the fact that they're not repaying. Because when it sounds pretty, Mr. President, to say, we have a 4-year grace period, we got a 5-year grace period. That's how we speak. But the point of the matter is that time will come where it has to be repaid. So if you borrow $7 billion, and then for 2025, 2026, 2027, all these bills now have to be repaid along with the existing debt, because government is a continuum and governments have to repay debts of previous governments. There's no questions asked. There's no questions asked. What the Democratic Party would not have done is restructure the national insurance debt for the workers in this country. That's what we would not have done, Mr. President. We would not have done that to deplete the national insurance, and now we have to work till 68 years old, at the 70 years old. And then then you have to work, you have to pay more contributions before you can be eligible for national insurance. We would not have done that.
They're not even paying national insurance for those who are working.
We would not have done that. We would not have allowed workers to come and work in the public sector and not pay national insurance for them either, and have them as contract workers. up and down Barbados working, and they have no social security.
Or NCC.
But let them talk, Mr. President. They need to stand up and defend it when it's their time. But we would not have done that even if we had to borrow money, even if we had to restructure the debt. We would not have hit the working people in this country like that.
And what do you raise, Senator Thompson?
Sir, on shock. Sir,
Mr. President,
on a point of order, sir.
Well, what's the point of order?
The Honourable Senator really is misleading the House. Sir, having misled himself, it is deeply troubling that the Honourable Senator is seeking to distance himself from the real reason that this administration had to address problems with the NIS. The National Insurance funds were not paid by the Democratic Labour Party. That was a problem that had to be addressed. The second difficulty that this administration faced that impacted changes in the rate of national insurance and the amount of payments is the fact that chronic non-communicable diseases and an aging population prevented us from getting resources at the rate and getting the yields from the fund that there were previously, especially after the Dems had depleted it.
Thank you, Senator Thompson. Please continue, Senator Walters.
Mr. President, it is a joke for the persons on the government side. It's a joke. And if the government wanted to solve an issue in national insurance is the fund where workers pay contributions to for social security benefits and pension. If you wanted as a government to fix an issue at national insurance, and you came into office and the previous government was not paying in payments to national insurance, whether debt or whether payments for workers, etc., would you write it off or would you not seek to pay it to help the workers? So in any event, that they're not act in the interest of the workers, Mr. President.
And they're not working in the interest of the workers that they employ now either.
Full stop. So I do not understand why Senator Thompson rose. I do not understand.
Order, please. Let Honourable Senator be heard.
I do not
Honourable Senators, please. Continue, Senator Walters.
I do not understand what that intervention was all about. The fact of the matter is that the government came into office and they wrote off national insurance debt. And in subsequent events in this chamber, they wrote it off further by what they call debt swaps and climate swaps and so forth. Fancy terms, but all affecting the head people that prop up this economy. People that get up in the morning and go to work. Mr. President, isn't a joke. It's nothing to laugh about. Mr. President, as I close, I caution this government. And I caution the members of the chamber from the government side to pay more attention and do not let people send me here with 2 or 3 notes to discredit themselves, but seek to get information and represent the people that they are claiming that they are going to represent in the next election. Because once they come into this chamber, and as soon as they are representatives or candidates for the Barbados Labour Party, the whole mannerisms change, the tone of their voice change, the amount of times or the frequency that they speak changes as well. You heard it in here earlier today, Mr. President, and you walked back in. But, Mr. President, it is no joke, it is no laughing matter. It is no laughing matter, it is no joke. And it says to me that this government has moved past caring for people. They said they care for people. They really have moved past caring for people, Mr. President. Because to come and defend the national insurance scheme by saying that a previous administration did not make payments in national insurance, but you write off the debt, it really boggles the mind, because you work to the disadvantage of those workers. When you take $61 million on a minimum annually out of their salaries and out of their wages and put it at the disposal of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and then you throw away $120 million from the Health Ministry by converting a medical facility to a construction site, and then you come to this chamber to borrow another $300 million. Mismanagement of public funds, Mr. President. And with those few words, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Are there any other speakers? If not, I'll ask Senator Dr. Mulroney to close. Senator Warren.
Speak.
Senator Maldo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry. Very brief couple of comments there for you. I notice there are two loans. I really have two questions that I would like to put to the Leader of Government Business who has introduced this. I noticed the first, or one of the loans, the OPEC Fund for International Development, is a US dollar loan, and I noticed that it is for Barbados dollars expenses. Given the situation, the local banking sector is flush with money that they're struggling to lend. I'm curious as to what is the need for us to borrow in US dollars or in foreign currency to pay local expenses. From a business perspective, this is something we would not do normally. We would always make sure that we match our liabilities and our expenses in similar currencies, and we would do so. It seems quite unusual, especially considering, I think they reported somewhere close to $4 billion in the banking system looking for homes to be lent, and that money today can be borrowed from the local banking system at very similar rates to this. In fact, when you look at one of these loans, it's 4.75% plus a 0.25% commitment fee plus another 0.25% front-end fee. So the question, sir, is why are we borrowing in foreign exchange for local expenses? Second question, sir, relates to the China Sinopharm International Corporation loan, $313.6 million, again in foreign exchange, on better terms, and this is a loan for infrastructure, very needed infrastructure in our healthcare system. It says it's for construction, it might be for other things, other equipment, etc. But when I see money being borrowed for infrastructure that has durable long-term value, I view that differently than loans for recurring expenses. But my only question related to this particular one, which I think is a reasonable loan, in fact, on quite favorable terms. One part of the loan was at 3.5%, and there's all kinds of moratorium and various things on it, a reasonable loan. But my question is, what else comes along with this loan? Because I notice it's from China Sinopharm. And I am hoping that one of the conditions of this loan is not that it must be built by a Chinese construction firm. Is it purely a loan that we're borrowing and the only cost to us as a country is in fact the interest rate? Or are there other terms that I am not hearing about? Because, sir, I have seen the construction going on in the St Andrew area, the Scotland District area, with loans that we have, I believe, taken from similar Chinese development banks, and it seems that those loans came along with the terms that we must use Chinese construction companies. And the method of construction, the people, the workers, the equipment, everything, very little of it is resounding to us here in Barbados. We have extremely good road construction companies in Barbados that have served us well for decades. We do not need Chinese workers to come to Barbados to show us how to build roads. And in fact, what I have seen of the building, especially on the East Coast Road, those of you who might have the misfortune in the last 6 months to a year to have to travel down there, it's not moving with any speed. It's not moving with any organization that is any better than I have seen from the Rayside Constructions or the Infras Constructions or the C.O. Williams Constructions or the many other construction companies who build roads in Barbados. So, sir, through you, as I say, I have no objection to this loan. The loan itself, it is for a good purpose, for our healthcare system. It will have durable value if it is spent wisely. But I am asking, is there some other condition that is not being told here, or is this going to public tender where Barbadian companies who are in the construction of buildings like this can build it with this money, or is this already been agreed that it must be built by a Chinese firm? Mr. President, I'm obliged to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Mallory. Senator Dr. Connell.
Mr. President, thank you very much for having the floor, and also thank you, members, for your very kind words of welcome to this place and not the other place. It certainly was not my intention on the first sitting in Senate to give a maiden speech, but certainly I could not miss this opportunity because what I'm about to share with you and the public of Barbados really is something that is very close to my heart. Allow me just to paint a picture. For my entire life in my field, I've worked in public service. I started at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital as a medical student in '97. According to some of my students watching, there probably were no textbooks back then either. And I worked my way through the hospital as an intern, as a senior house officer, as a registrar in the Department of Medicine, not ENT, and finally as a consultant. I then furthered my training in a clinical specialty in internal medicine, clinical pharmacology, which is a research specialty, and it naturally fit then that I became more positioned with the University of the West Indies. And so although I work at the hospital, I'm going to be very careful because I know that members of the university community may be watching. I work for the university. Against this backdrop, I want to speak to you briefly, however, on what I hope will call this chamber to recognize a sense of urgency. Now, doctors are notorious for making everything urgent, but I hope that the picture that I am painting is that of an urgency, and dare I say, an emergency. The burden that the hospital faces has changed significantly. Let me just give you an example. When I was an intern, with an afro, a lot more hair than I have now, I saw one stroke. More hair, which isn't a lot. One stroke, possibly every 2 weeks. One stroke, and it was really someone who was maybe in their 70s and 80s, which I no longer call elderly. But certainly when we saw a stroke, everyone rushed to the room because you don't know when's the next chance you're going to see a stroke. A medical student, 2 weeks ago, I said, if you've seen any interesting cases, we were on call, and she said to me, just the usual stroke. Just the usual stroke. And I'll tell you why it's a usual stroke, because looking at the ward census for the university team then, that's a month ago, we were admitting on average 2 to 3 strokes per night. So that's a huge change. What struck me is that this young lady, who was very nervous presenting for her first time to a consultant on ward rounds, and I know at least one member knows how intimidating that can be, she said to me that, oh, but this is an old stroke, as in a stroke occurring in an older person. So of course I'm expecting 80s, 90s. This is a 45-year-old man. I say this to make the point that even the generation of practitioners that we have now have become so accustomed to seeing a significant NCD burden in younger patients. So the demographics have changed. This is no longer the old person coming in, and I had to explain to some non-Bajans recently, having a Passover. This is a young person in their productive years, contributing NIS, hopefully, and making a contribution to their country. In fact, I will go further by saying that this young stroke I am referring to is married. He has a daughter, 3 years old, and his wife, who was sitting next to him in the emergency room in shock, was pregnant. This is serious. And sometimes when we as academics, and I'm guilty of this, we look at data and we mention X number of people will die of stroke, or sometimes it's hard to face the reality of what is in front of you, the person and the family and the disability, and how this will change someone's life in front of you. There are several reasons why this has occurred. It hasn't happened overnight. It will not change overnight. But what I'm about to say should bring cause for you to believe that we are not in a good place. We have this aging population. The aging population, many would argue, is a good thing in terms of medical science. It means people are living longer. When I was an intern and Chris Maynard was, well, he was probably still a consultant then. But when I entered the emergency room, someone like a George Nicholson, who is now deceased, would say to me, if you come in with a heart attack, we give you morphine and a Bible, right? Because that's all that we can do for you. Relieve your pain, hope for the best, and pray about it. Now someone comes to the emergency room. Time is everything. Time is everything. Time is in minutes and hours, not days. They have to get an ECG. They have to get these labs done. Then they're going to get all these expensive drugs. In fact, I am aware from reading the newspaper and from following the debates in this same chamber, I wasn't anticipating anything, that this government has expanded the services of pre-hospital care in some areas, like for heart attacks and for stroke. This is significant. It not only means that the patient coming with an identical diagnosis maybe 20 years ago now gets a lot more done, and the cost of those drugs, you know, a vial of a clot-busting drug can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? An interventional cardiologist, this isn't just a heart doctor, this is someone who can take you to a cath lab and within hours unblock the arteries in your heart, significantly improving your mortality. That training takes years. My colleague who we trained in internal medicine, who traveled and trained at Johns Hopkins, which is one of the top centers, and the Mayo Clinic, I know. The reason she is back here is certainly not the salary, but because as a true St. Lucie person, she wanted to give back to her country. This is the cost of health care. It's expensive. Now, what about the human cost? Because remember, I started by saying that consultant would have said, give them a Bible and some morphine and leave them with the family. And if they're alive the next morning, then okay, well, you've made it past the worst. We'll then try to treat your heart failure and hopefully get you out of hospital or not. This person who is in hospital is utilizing staff. The nurse that has to stand by the bedside to watch a drug being administered, because you can't have this person in a corridor, like you may see several patients in A&E corridor. They have to be on intensive care. Intensive care takes money. You have to have a specialist, doctors and teams seeing them. They may have to go to the cath lab to get a procedure done. And after that, continued monitoring. It is extremely resource intense. When I was a registrar in the Department of Medicine, I covered both emergency room, ward calls from difficult people like surgeons, as well as the intensive care unit, the medical ICU. One registrar was the only junior doctor on covering all these areas. Now the ICU care is such that there is a dedicated registrar just on for ICU because of what is being done for these patients and the fact that they are so ill. So it's aging, yes. We are doing a lot more for patients. We are investigating them. Some might say we are investigating them too much at times. But then there are also issues inherent to any institution. And let me say I have trained at what I consider to be one of the top hospitals in the United Kingdom. The same issues that occur at the QEH I have seen at St. Thomas's Hall with all the resources. They're just inherent hospital challenges. Many of them relate to communication, so some of them aren't even expensive things. Poor handovers and poor communication. Relatives are upset. Who is my father's doctor? I can't find, I don't know who consultant to speak to. The amount of times when I am on service means that I'm covering the hospital, and I have to get a call from a politician because a relative has been trying to get a doctor unsuccessfully for days. This is in 2025 where we have all this technology going on. You can do all these things, but you can't get information urgently on a patient or a relative as next of kin. And Mr. President, we mentioned the difficulty and nuances of next of kin over lunch. These are not difficult things to fix either. For instance, there could be automated systems where relatives call in and they are able to state their relative's name, who they are. It is authenticated that they are the next of kin and verified. And an appointment system is set up so that doctors can prepare to chat with relatives with the information that they need. This reduces anxiety considerably. 9 times out of 10, when I have a meeting with a patient's relative, and by this time they're usually fuming, it's because they've been trying to get hold of anyone desperately for days. I have to always start by saying I am embarrassed and I'm sorry that for this wait. I didn't get your messages, or I did not, or sometimes we're trying to contact them and we can't get them either. This can't be satisfactory in 2025. Now, I promise not to talk about a pandemic, and I will just call it the pandemic. But certainly there has been a COVID effect, and whether we admit it or not, the COVID-19 pandemic has also caused an uptick in the NCDs. Whether you believe what COVID has done to all of us, we do know for sure, and there's WHO data to suggest this, access to care, possibly delayed access to care during the pandemic, meant that people were diagnosed later with their cancers, rationed their drugs. I had one lady during COVID who said to me, well, look, you on television talking about if you have high blood pressure, don't come near the hospital. And then you're saying that I must come to the hospital to get a prescription refilled? Forget that. I take in one tablet one day, another tablet another day, and I'm spacing my tablets out so that I don't have to go anywhere near the hospital. These have consequences, right? The number one presentation to the hospital, to any hospital in the world, And I challenge any of you to go and Google it, or as I am told now by my Gen Z students, chat GPT it, is heart failure. Heart failure is a revolving door diagnosis. When I discharge a patient with heart failure, I almost can predict in a few days, weeks, they're going to come back in the emergency room. This takes up resources. Because when that person represents the hospital, the whole algorithm starts all over again, including the investigation. So you're double, triple investigating patients. We can't afford this. The heart failure admissions in the hospital are significant. If you go to the emergency room now, and you just look along any corridor, I would say roughly 1 of the 4 patients that you see in the corridor are heart failure, and the other ones are probably related to acute emergencies. Hospitals internationally have recognized that this is a problem. They have recognized that we cannot manage things the way we did, and so outpatient facilities have had to be redesigned and reformatted. This is what I think this loan might speak to, the expansion of outpatient facilities. But it cannot be expansion and business as usual. It can't be the usual set of surgical outpatients and medical outpatients and, well, I will argue for the expansion of the hypertension clinic, but that's a clear bias. You have to be innovative. Why are people returning? I mentioned one example, heart failure. Then have an outpatient heart failure clinic. In every other jurisdiction, including many small island developing countries, there is a heart failure clinic. You come in, it is expected that over time you will retain fluid over days or weeks or whatever. You get your shot of Lasix, a drug used to treat heart failure, you go home. You don't come into the emergency room breathless when you're end stage and then have to be admitted. So you delay the admission. We know it's going to happen. We know from the literature it's going to happen. So it makes sense having these units. We are also now moving into a whole completely new era of exciting drugs, biologics. These will change how we treat diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and other immune-mediated diseases. These drugs do not require a patient to be in a hospital bed. They do now at the hospital, but they don't in most other hospitals. Day units, home care, the use of technology like telemedicine and telemonitoring. These drugs can be administered safely in an outpatient setting. So I hope that with the expansion of our hospital, it will not just be an expansion of the existing clinic structures that we have. Let me speak briefly on oncology, because this is something that is going to be a challenge for us for some time in the future. Cancer rates are increasing. They're lifestyle driven, yes, but there probably is another factor influencing this. As we get older, our risk increases. Certainly we in Barbados can be proud of our decrease in smoking rates, cigarette smoking. I don't know if other rates in other types of smoking are increasing. But certainly we also know that another risk factor that no one likes to talk about is there, and that is alcohol consumption. Even me as a doctor, I don't like to have a conversation with patients about alcohol consumption. But we know there's no safe limit now in medicine for cancer risk, at least in terms of alcohol consumption. This is something that we have to discuss openly and candidly with patients. And so with oncology and the burden of oncology internationally, most hospitals have removed this from the primary hospital space. If you go to St. Thomas's Hospital now in London, you will see this large glass building that you really want to stay there, although you don't want to stay there. It's the cancer center. It's the best part of the hospital landscape. The best views, arguably the best meals, I've tried them. And it's where you want to be treated. Barbados has to move to a new form of cancer care, where we see cancer as a chronic disease and not as a death sentence. With all the sophisticated drugs that are available, we need sophisticated specialists. there was an incident a few weeks ago, or maybe months ago, where the hospital had challenges, I know, with a hematologist. You can't be a tertiary care institution without a hematologist. Hematology is part of internal medicine in some respects, but as I said to a colleague, I am not prepared certainly to manage a hematology patient without a hematologist. These are critical shortages. I've used hematology as an example because I am told that there is now one or maybe two hematologists on staff. That is never enough for a tertiary hospital for a population of this size. I mentioned stroke intentionally. You would say, well, with all these strokes coming to hospital and with a stroke unit, which was driven by data from the George Allen Chronic Disease Research Center on the prevalence of stroke in the Barbados stroke study, that they would have multiple neurologists or stroke doctors. There is one neurologist. One neurologist. When that neurologist goes on holiday, or for some reason, God forbid, falls ill, there is no neurologist. Now, I told you about heart attacks and the time that is needed for treatment for a heart attack, maybe 6 hours, give or take, for definitive treatment. For stroke, it's less. And the only person who can make certain clinical decisions for stroke is a neurologist. Does any one of us in here, God forbid, want to have one of us or our relative have a stroke and that neurologist is on holiday somewhere? Because she deserves a holiday, right? The outcomes are completely different. So when we speak about expansion of services and expansion of the hospital, it always sounds good, but we need expansion of specialists and personnel. I also believe that a critical gap in hospital medicine, and I have no experience in primary care medicine except probably as a medical student, the critical gap is the communication between the primary care doctor and the hospitalist. I am guilty of this. There are many times when a patient comes to the emergency room and my very team is seeing them having not even looked at a referral letter from the primary care doctor, because it's almost like a custom. You're the primary care doctor. When they get really sick and they come to us, that connection needs to be made. But that communication is so much easier if we're all using a shared platform, like a health information system that is critical to healthcare delivery. I can almost guarantee you, because it happens every Thursday morning at the hospital, in my clinic, if there are, let's say, 12 patients, a third of those notes are going to be missing. How are you going to manage a patient without their note? You don't have the medical history. The last time I asked someone, well, you know what medication you're on, so I could at least rewrite a prescription, he said the pink tablets. So these are things that are reality, and I keep thinking, why is it in 2025 we haven't quite gotten there as quickly as we should? So with all of the barriers that I have mentioned, there are, of course, solutions. And what I'm about to say may sound extremely biased, but I do believe, and I don't think that Barbados is the only territory that is experiencing this, healthcare professionals have been decentralized from decision-making in health. And what that has done, it has created a void. Quite often with very good intentions, hospital administrations and other specialists make recommendations. And when they filter down to patient care, the frontline providers say, well, who made this decision? Someone who has no type of medical training or nursing training or paramedical or anything. So it's a challenge. We need to get back in the decision-making space. The very reason that I am standing before you here, Mr. President, is because on many occasions I have said to junior doctors, if you are not part of the solution, then you are part of the QEH problem. If you don't write the complaints, if you don't send the emails, and I know that people at the QEH are probably wondering why they didn't get any emails today, it's because it was here, then you are part of the problem. And you must represent health, and more importantly, you must advocate on behalf of patients, not just on the wards or in the clinics, but in the public space. And so I would close by recommending 3 key things. With this rapid expansion, it should not only be an expansion of the existing structure, it should respond to the health needs of the country, but also be innovative in its design. These data are readily available from our sister countries and even from other more resourceful countries. There should be the urgent implementation of the health information system. This is critical. We cannot continue to manage patients using paper records. It is too dangerous. With some urgency, there needs to be a clear communication portal so that any relative out there watching this can pick up the phone, call an automated system, and be able to speak to the managing team within a certain number of hours, 24 hours or what have you. But it's easy, and we need to prioritize relatives being able to get information. And finally, Mr. President, the hospital is only the tip of the health iceberg. One could argue that the base of this iceberg is primary care, but way below the surface of the ocean is this expanding cause for development of the iceberg, and these are the social determinants of health. We have to address the social determinants of health. If we consider that many of us, and I can give you some data, 4 out of 5 of us in this very space will die of an NCD. That is fact, unless you have some kind of arrangement from a much higher power. We certainly don't want to die from a gunshot or an accident. We will die from an NCD. This is going to be a problem that's going to face us moving forward. We have to come up with creative, innovative solutions. And let me just say, as I said at the WHO meeting in Geneva, for small island developing countries, prevention is not an option. It is the only option, because we cannot afford the cost of treatment if we do not have prevention. We need to invest in prevention and the social determinants of health. I look forward to the expansion of this space, but more importantly, I look forward to the expansion of our innovation in thought in healthcare delivery. How we transform healthcare over the next 5 to 10 years using technology, artificial intelligence, remodeling of healthcare, reuse of people in non-traditional roles, all these things, because our public deserves it. And more importantly, and quite selfishly, I say to myself, I could be a patient at the hospital at any time, and I want the best care for myself as well. Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Connell, for your initial address. What a way to start. Senator, the Honourable Mr. Christopher Baylor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to congratulate my colleague on his maiden speech. He was certainly bold in his speed. Mr. President, it would be remiss of me not to say a few words about Harrison Point. I believe that we must separate the important role that that facility played from the politics of the cost. While I've never seen any accounts for what it costs, and I knew that it cost a lot of money, I have no idea about the management of the funds that were provided, but I can only speak to the lives that are saved. And there's an instrument that we use in medicine called the retrospectoscope. We can always find problems looking through the retrospectoscope. But Harrison Point was central to how this government managed the COVID pandemic. I do not believe that if we did not have Harrison Point and all of the help that was provided in terms of materials and manpower from outside of the country, that we could have had the outcomes that we have. Now, this bill which speaks of borrowing $300 million plus for an annex at the QEH has been long in coming. When we, in 2018, passed the health contribution levy, and it was estimated because of the rate of employment at the time that it would raise approximately $60 million. I jumped so high that I'm sure I hit the ceiling because I heard. Because I thought at the time it was going to be in addition to the voted budget. And that turned out not to be the case. It was, in my words, a transfer of a cost onto the taxpayer. And I listened recently to a conversation where a new minister has spoken about providing parents with bills showing the cost of what services have been provided for the children. It would be wonderful if the same happened in healthcare. In fact, if the government ever wishes to do that, it should be in healthcare, so that we can all see what it really costs. It would probably cut some of the wastage, but persons will realize that it is not really free. It is very expensive to treat people. Now, even if all of the 75 million that is currently raised, went to the QEH, plus its normal voted amounts, I do not know if it'll be enough, because healthcare is changing, our population is getting older, our facility is crowded, and we have to really, as Dr. Connell said, rethink how we do things. Are there services that can be delivered effectively and safely with the same or better outcomes in an outpatient setting rather than being in a hospital? Sir, we had a recent experience. Someone, I think it was Senator Walters, asked for a list of the positive things that have been done at the QEH. I am not going to do a juke check shirt because there have been a few. One can question whether they've been efficient, whether they have come in under budget or at budget, or whether they have gone ridiculously over budget. But there's some landmarks. We had the E&E department that was expansion and renovation that was supposed to cost 11 million and be finished in a certain time, and it went way over schedule and cost $5 million more. Is it better? I will not answer that. But if we learn from our own experiences, that should tell us that if you're going to spend $300 million this time, we better prepare properly. We had better fix the problems before we move in. We have to, at the planning stage, look ahead and see, while we cannot predict how medicine will change and how fast it will change and where it will be in the 5 years at least that will take us to do this, we have to now put in place all the systems that will make it efficient. We can't go in there with paper files. Hospital digitizing. Do we have the staff, both in terms of clinical medical staff, nursing staff, all the maintenance and experts you need for your linear accelerator, your PET scanner? Do we have a few years to get it in place? We can't wait to go into a building that is new and put the same people and the same bad practices in. And if you have to import staff, where will they come from? Where will they come from? And all the social and cultural things that could possibly go wrong. So we need to bear in mind that while this 300 million is supposed to be for construction, we have to ask, where will the rest of the money come from for doing all the other things that will be needed? It's fine to build a building and put in the equipment, but there'll be maintenance, there'll be staffing, there'll be drugs, and everything else. So we now have to start thinking about, with this expanded facility, will it earn money? Can it pay in part for its own upkeep? Will it mean that Barbadians will accept it as a place of excellence, and rather than draining foreign exchange to go overseas, will they accept it and use it? So government has a major job to do, unlike the water tanks and all the other things, to educate the public about what we're going to do, and I say we on purpose, what we are going to do, and where will it take us, and what difference it will make. What difference it will make with outcomes for patients. Outcomes for those with the greatest fear, and the fear is fear of death. When you have cancer, that is always a major fear. Mr. President, our hospital, excuse me, continues to have shortages, not only of physical beds, but staff. We recently hired a radiation oncologist who has this unbelievable job of theoretically looking after cancer in a population of almost 300,000 people. One person. That person has to sleep, eat, go on holiday, and do all the other things that human beings do. Have time for prayer and everything else. And we are speaking about expansion. So we are struggling to get a second person. So if you're going to build a $300 million facility, who will staff it? What intermediate grade staff will we have? Who in the Caribbean will be willing to come to Barbados and work for the salaries we get paid and the privileges and benefits that we get? I don't know. So we will have some issues. But we need to go ahead with the matter and provide the physical facility. Mr. President, cancer treatment is expensive. chemotherapy drugs, and all the lot are costly. But I think that there are sources of medications that, while if you look at what happens in the private sector and what happens in the public sector, there are differences in outcomes. So if you're going to speak about a cancer treatment center, there should be a point in time where we can look back, or as Dr. Connell was suggesting, we have to gather the data continuously and look back and say, we've just spent $500 million, and these are the improvements in outcomes. Because if at a certain point in time, you can't see improvements in outcomes, and outcomes don't necessarily mean longevity. It might be outcomes, improve outcomes in terms of your quality of life after treatment. Most people want improve outcomes in terms of longevity. I too want that. We have to be able to look back and see whether, when we have done what we said we want to do, if it has made a difference. But we have to get it right. So there should be provision for lots of research, even on our existing data. But the government has to run it. The government has to drive it. The university can participate at a ground level, and they do, but the government has to have a comprehensive plan. Mr. President, our cancer burden for gastrointestinal cancers and prostate cancer and all the female cancer is large. And every day we hear of someone else in our age group, sir, who has gone the other side. And sometimes you hear the sad stories of delays, and the government, on its positive side, has recently spent a large sum of money. I do not know the exact cost, somewhere in the region of, I think, $12 to $14 million to install a linear accelerator. That has been long overdue. It will hopefully bring better outcomes for those who can be treated. And government has also spent large sums of money in the interim while that delayed project was going on to send people overseas. But we must remember that while we can say we have now started treatment locally, those in the backlog still have to be treated, and you cannot treat them all in one day. So I do not know if the government has contemplated stopping the program of sending persons overseas, but I believe that the two need to run in parallel until you catch up. Otherwise, there will be persons who unfortunately will have poor outcomes because of lack of treatment. You may have a facility here, but because you have a backlog and there are delays, people will still be waiting. Now, sir, I do not know what's the start time for this center. When will it be finished? And how long it will take us to correct the deficits that we have and employ all the people that we need to get things running correctly. So I expect that there will be a large committee, not necessarily in terms of numbers of people, but in terms of brain power, who will oversee this major change, because we have a hospital where one department is going to be treated with a $300 million plus injection of capital. And that says that we believe that we have a big problem. Unfortunately, the problem that Dr. Connell spoke about with the chronic non-communicable diseases and their complications do not get the same sort of profile as will happen when you build a big, tall new building. But the burdens and the difficulties that we have in the QEH, in the A&E, and on our wards are not going to go away. And they will still probably get worse. Not because the people who are there are not doing a good job, but the sheer volume overwhelms us. So I hope that there is somewhere secretly a plan being hatched to find alternative space to house those people so that the other parts of the hospital that are being stopped from functioning, like the surgical operating rooms because the ICUs are filled, there will be a solution or solutions found to those problems, and that people's outcomes are not made worse because of delays in treatment. So there's no point having an updated ambulance service to get a person to hospital in record time, and then that person waits for 24 hours to have what could have been care that could have reversed their stroke or had a better outcome from an acute myocardial infarction. Sir, the government is definitely looking ahead. I suppose those who are familiar with economics will argue about whether the government can pay its debt in the future or if it's borrowing too much money. My main concern, sir, is that as I prepare to exit medicine, I will not like to look back from that rocking chair and say it really did not change in my time. And every time we spend money and we painfully look back and see that things might be worse, it saddens me and it hurts other people. But sir, what the image that we project about our hospital, sir, is important. And if we project a negative image, particularly if the negative image is projected by the chief administrator, we have a hard time overcoming it. There was a slogan during COVID, no retreat, no surrender. And that was the most positive slogan. But it was equally matched with the one that said, don't come here. And if you tell people don't come here often enough, they will not come. And when they do come, they will always be unhappy. So we now have to work and say, do come here, we can help you. But when they arrive, we must be able to do the things that we say we can do and produce better outcomes, sir. Sir, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Mayer. Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to make a brief contribution in this debate with regard to the two loans agreements before the Senate. The first being the policy-based loan from the OPEP fund, and the second being the loan from the China Sinopharm International Corporation, which will go towards the expansion of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Mr. President, in making this brief contribution, Mr. President, I wanted to, the policy-based loan, I believe that the leader of government business did not offer us, well, the lead spokesperson did not offer the chamber sufficient information on this loan. And I think when you are discussing a policy-based loan, it is different from the loan from the Sinopharm International Corporation, because we know the specific project which it will be going towards. But I think that the public of Barbados have a right to know where this money, 100 million Barbados dollars in total, will be going to. Policy-based loans are very broad. It's not necessarily to a project. It could be used to pay salaries. It could be used to pay debt. It could be used for a number of things. Even though the legislation said it goes towards social services, our social services in this country are wide. So could we have a specific breakdown of the government intended plan of utilization of this policy-based loan, Mr. President? That, I believe, is information that should be made available to the Chamber and to the people of Barbados. Barbadians are becoming wary of the consistent borrowing of this government, and we are not seeing the residual benefit in terms of the projects that the money is being applied to. Yes, we know that governments need to borrow in terms of continuing their infrastructural program, capital works project, and for economic development. But we have a government that has borrowed money, and many of the projects which they have invested in have not contributed to the economic development or growth of the country. You have a government that has borrowed money, and that money has gone into wastage and monuments, which Barbadians up to this day have no idea what they are for. One classic example, and the correct minister will be responding to this, would be the structure at Newton as you go from Coral Ray Cemetery to the Newton Roundabout. Passed there a few days ago, and the curtain seems to be flapping in the wind, ready to blow off. This is a project which was implemented for Carifesta. We do understand that there may have been a few Carifesta events there, but many Barbadians would like to know, what is it? What is it for? What is it used for? And another critical question, Mr. President, with this government, what was the cost? Because up to this day, we cannot get out of this government an idea of the cost for hosting Carifesta, and further, an idea of the cost of many of the monuments which were established for Carifesta, including that monument at Newton, which is almost like a dilapidated chicken pen at this stage, with the canvas flying all over I believe that to save face, you should rush, Mr. President, the government should rush people up there to change the curtains for Christmas. Because it looked to me as though that was the intended plan, to change the curtains for Christmas. And the others on that side, Mr. President, they will joke when my colleague Senator make strong remarks about the concern, bring to you the concern of the people of Barbados, but they're not getting it. That Barbadians are very worried and concerned about the debt which they have racked up, and they cannot see it being invested in projects to the development of this country. Agriculture is struggling. You're not seeing any investment in agriculture. The only investment you seem to be getting is in tourism, but we cannot rely on tourism solely for the economic growth and development in this country. There are monuments.
Senator Morris, please. I can hear you up here.
There are monuments that are being erected all over the place, and we do not know the costs of these monuments, and they're not attracting any economic gain for the country. They're not employing Barbadians in any significant way. Then there are the road projects, Mr. President. It's a policy-based loans, social services. It could very well be going towards the roads as well, Mr. President. I am asking for clarification on that. But after the heavy rainfall which we had a couple weeks ago in November, just before independence, many Barbadians were shocked and to this day are horrified at the roads which they have to drive on, because it's more or less you're not driving on roads, you're navigating across potholes to get from part A to part B in Barbados. And this government has wasted significant amounts of money in the Mill and Pave program, Mr. President. And that Mill and Pave program has resulted in all of the paved roads being washed off in sheets and clumps. You can go to some of the areas and you will see the clumps of the pavement next to the side of the road as a result of the heavy rainfall. We are concerned that the loans and the money being borrowed is not being spent to the benefit of the people of Barbados. And this government campaigned on resilience. And if resilience in terms of having roads that could withstand 2 inches of rainfall, if you don't consider that to be resilience, I don't know where the money is going, and I don't understand it. You should be, the roads, Mr. President, should be able to withstand 2 inches of rainfall or 6 hours of rainfall or 8 hours of rainfall, because you complain in that you are getting loans to build out the resilience of this country. No, we didn't face Hurricane Melissa. We just faced 6 to 8 hours of heavy rainfall in November. And every single road in Barbados is a pothole network today. And this government campaigned that they were fixing that, and they were fixing drainage in Barbados. We are concerned about that. The people of Barbados are concerned that the money is not being spent the correct way, and this government is just borrowing money, and somebody's pocket must be getting fat from working on the projects. And all Barbadians and taxpayers, we are just paying heavy taxes. It's a result of the heavy borrowing that the cost of living in this country cannot come down, Mr. President, because of the heavy taxes. And again, going back to the policy-based loan.
Excuse me. Senators, if you all want to speak on your feet, there's too much noise. I've heard it in the broadcast, it affects the quality of the broadcast. If I can hear you all out here, then it's going to feed into the debate. So just chill, please. Continue, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, going back to the policy-based loans to deal with social services. We have a welfare sector in this department in this country which is crumbling. You have persons who made requests to welfare for assistance with food. 3 and 4 months ago and up to this day, the welfare officer cannot get back to them with the assistance. Is this policy-based loan going to supplement the welfare department so that they will be able to address the needs and concerns of those persons? You have persons reaching out to the welfare department who were told asked by the welfare department to seek accommodation, and the welfare will be willing to pay the rent for those individuals because of their housing situation is not adequate. They did that. And some were successfully able to find persons who were willing to rent their properties to the welfare department. And you know, up to this day, some of those people are still being disadvantaged and not being able to move into those accommodations because the welfare department in this country has not made the site visit or approved the rental accommodations for persons that they're told. And they're asked to find rental accommodation, and we will pay for it. For 3 and 4 months, Mr. President, that is unjust, that is unfair to the vulnerable person in this country. Because people don't go to welfare just because they need, and there are some cases where people desperately need that assistance. And a government that cares should make sure that the assistance is provided. So I'm asking Senator Monroe Knight, is the policy-based loan going to finance the welfare department? And why is the welfare department not adequately financed out of the high taxes which this government has raked in from the people of this country? The high taxes which continue to cause the cost of living in this country to be high. All of these are things that are going on in this country which are unfair and unjust to the people of this country. And when you have to question and critique the government on their borrowing, their cackle like hyenas as though it is some sort of joke, when it is real to the people of Barbados, Mr. President. And with regard to the payment of national insurance, Mr. President, you can go across the length and breadth of Barbados and ask any civil servant if they ever receive a statement from the national insurance saying that their NIS was not paid. But I challenge Senator Monroe Knight to give an account to the people of Barbados of the number of contract workers hired by this Barbados Labour Party government who national insurance is not being paid for because they're being considered as self-employed persons, and when they go to the national insurance to try to pay national insurance as a self-employed individual, they're denied that right because national insurance rightly tell them you are not self-employed, you are employed by an organization. And I speak of the persons working at the Sports Council. I speak of the persons working at the NCC, all of those areas, and this government should be ashamed to even get up in this house to make people think that they did everything great for the national insurance of Barbados, and to know that the national insurance need those funds, but you're not paying them for average Barbadians who you employ as contract workers, week on, week off, so that they would have to come back to you and feel persons who cannot continue with their life, because as long as you are not paying national insurance for them, they're not considered to be in a position to go and get a loan. They can't even go to court to bring them to bed. And that's probably why some of these same persons will need to go to the welfare for assistance with housing, because they don't have the track record, because you're not paying the national insurance for them, because your conditions of service for them are not sufficient that they can move on with their lives, Mr. President. So let Senator Monroe Knight respond to that. I'm waiting to hear what is the true number, Mr. President. With regard to the Signer Farm loan, now, we do know that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital needs the expansion. We don't argue with that. We do know that it needs the development, but I am glad to hear the contribution of Senator Connell and Senator Maynard, who live the experience on a daily basis. Barbadians are concerned about the Queen Elizabeth Hospital accident and emergency in particular. They see it as a death trap. They regard it as a nightmare. The junior minister in the other place made a statement that this is not true and was heavily ridiculed by the public for that statement, because that is not the lived reality of many Barbadians that have to spend 3 and 4 days or 5 days in accident and emergency waiting to be seen by a doctor. And as Dr. Connell, Senator Connell referred, in some cases, it's a life and death situation. If it's a heart attack, you have a couple of hours. If it's a stroke, whatever the case might be, we need to improve on this situation. Money was borrowed to expand the accident and emergency department with the expectation that it would have dealt with that bottleneck. But Senator Connell mentioned some of the things which caused the bottleneck. The fact that, one, even though you tell the patients don't come to accident and emergency and go to the private facilities, when they do go to the private facilities and are then referred to the said accident and emergency, the wait time is the same, the referral letters are not even looked to, looked at, and the consultants that arrangements may have been made by any private facilities don't hear about the arrival of these patients until 3 or 4 days after they have been sitting in accident and emergency. These things need to be fixed, Mr. President. And like Dr. Senator Maynard said, just expanding the facility will not fix the problem. It will give you additional space. Yes, you do need the additional beds, which I believe is like 90 beds or so, which is part of the challenge. And you had a facility which could have assisted with that in the short term until that is built, because we are agreeing on the loan now, but that facility may not come on stream for another 4 years. But we need to have a solution to the current everyday crisis that Barbadians are facing. And the solution to that problem, Mr. President, stands within the Harrison Point facility. And this government should be ashamed that after spending $120 million to retrofit that facility, put the best equipment there, for it not to be utilized now to address the bottlenecks at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and to assist in the healthcare delivery of the people of Barbados. These are things that this government must stand accountable for, Mr. President. And when Barbadians say that they are concerned about the borrowing and the way that the money is being spent, it is real, because they're feeling it in their pockets. They pay the high taxes and the high cost of living in this country. They have family members who go to accident and emergency and wait 5 days, and some of them don't come out of accident and emergency, unfortunately, Mr. President. They have family members who've been waiting on operations at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital for 6 months or a year, and when the time for the appointment comes back, they get another one. They get another 6-month wait, Mr. President. I think that Barbadians, after borrowing over $7.6 billion, they would like to see a resolution of all of these problems. After paying all of these taxes, the high cost of living which we have, we would want to see a resolution of these problems. And the Barbadians are complaining up to today, Mr. President, about garbage collection, because we've gone back to that poor state where the garbage is not being collected on a weekly basis. Sometimes in some areas you wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or you have to call to find out when the garbage truck is coming. We have, even though you brought in the electric buses, people are still waiting for 2 hours or more for a Martins Bay bus, a Bathsheba bus, and other buses at different times of the day. So how has the electric buses really helped the system, Mr. President? And is that the reason why you plan to divest Transport Board, because you don't know how to manage it? Answer that question, Senator Monroe Knight, in your wrap-up to the debate. Give us an idea of where the policy-based loans will be going. Barbadians have a right to question this government. Winning 30 seats in the election did not create a dictatorship in Barbados. Neither did it create a communist country. It is still a democratic country, and the citizens have a right to question the government. And the opposition have a right also to question the government. And I think it is the duty and the responsibility of the government to respond to those questions, and not to make it seem as though you are talking foolishness or you have absolutely no right, Mr. President. And we cannot allow this government to get away with that, Mr. President. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Honourable Dr. Chantal Monroe-Knight, please,
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank all of the honourable senators that collided with the resolution, collided with fact, collided with substantive and very thoughtful interventions, and had a maturity in the debate. For all of the others, I want to remind them, Mr. President, of 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13 talks about sounding brass and tinkling cymbals. It was essentially saying that the gnashing of teeth and the loud raising of voices and thumping of the chest is very much empty and meaningless, Mr. President. You know, it's unfortunate that an attempt to have a mature discussion in relation to how Barbados addresses its development needs can be reduced, Mr. President, to shouting and wailing and the appearance, Mr. President, of innuendo. It is unfortunate. But I want to remind, perhaps, Mr. President, some in this chamber, that they will have perhaps better experience at communism and dictatorship than most of us here. We certainly, on this side, don't have any experience with locking anybody out, shutting any gates, putting on locks, Mr. President, shutting out people, and putting them in the rain, essentially nullifying voices, Mr. President. We don't have that experience on this side. So we are not sure about this notion about dictatorship and communism. We would have to be schooled. We would have to be schooled by the other side, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also want to suggest that there is clearly some selective bafflement on the floor, Mr. President. Because I would want to know if the opposition senators were not baffled by the trauma of Barbadians when they sent home public workers. I would want to know, Mr. President, if the opposition senators were not baffled when they took away tertiary education and therefore reduced the opportunities for Barbadian citizens in this country to achieve a higher level of education and achieve their aspirations. I would want to know and to understand, Mr. President, if there was not a level of bafflement with that, Mr. President. But unlike the opposition senators who spoke, Mr. President, I am going to ensure that I retain the level of decorum, class, Mr. President, that is required of this chamber. I will not reduce myself, Mr. President. I will not reduce myself, Mr. President, to a debate that mirrors 1 Corinthians 13. So let me collide with facts and with reason, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to thank Your Honourable Senator Dr. Kenneth Connell for his intervention, and again for him saying to us that indeed, as we seek to make this investment as identified in the resolution, that we need to be able to make sure that we do so in a considered way that moves us, that moves the healthcare system, one, to look at the underlying issues within the healthcare system and within the health concerns and challenges. That we need to make sure that we infuse innovation and respond to the real needs and challenges within the system. I'm happy to indicate that the introduction of the new information management system for the QEH has actually already started. It was announced, and it is therefore in progress. And that the issue, therefore, of the loss of records, I am not going to say that it's going to be solved immediately, but clearly that was one of the challenges that was recognized, and the intent, therefore, is to be able to make sure that we frontally address it. I would also want to advise, as I did and I alluded to in my presentation, that there are actually 280 new posts established at QH, clinical posts. And these posts, Mr. President, were not identified by those that did not have anything or any knowledge, any critical knowledge about the needs within the sector, but they were actually identified by each clinical department within the QEH, again, through the estimates process, and therefore we have been working through 280, Mr. President, 280 posts established there. Mr. President, I also want to note as well that the QH has introduced a program, a radio program, I believe it's called The Pulse, so that we are able to keep the public informed of some of the changes that are happening, but also as well to make sure that we maintain that connection and voice, Mr. President, in an attempt, again, to bring the public along as we do the transformation that is necessary at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Mr. President, in my presentation, I spoke about the nature of the complexity of the challenges, and the fact that they have to happen one over time and in a number of different ways, so that the challenges will not go away instantly, but over time, like I said, the government is determined to fix it. I would have also alluded to the fact that I am aware that just this year, months, I think it was over the period perhaps of September, October, that we did some diagnostic analysis to look at the challenges happening within QEH, happening within A&E, established targets by which we intend to continue to measure performance. I'm also aware, Mr. President, that a training program has been established, and not only one-off training, but a continual program for retraining, Mr. President, within the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Again, the transformation happening at a number of different levels in order to be able to address the nuanced challenge that is faced within the healthcare sector. I'm also aware, Mr. President, that the government is looking at the issue of community care, so that again, rather than people having to have that primary care consistently to go to the QEH, that we can within communities as well help to train up people within communities to be able to take care, to check in, to have nurses, Mr. President, moving directly into communities, moving directly into households. We all should be aware that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital has already started its mobile unit that moves into communities, sometimes on demand, to be able at least to take care, do some diagnostic, Mr. President. So as I said, we are attempting, Mr. President, over time to be able to address some of the deficits within the healthcare. Mr. President, I also want to note that I had indeed spoken to the policy-based loan. I would have said that within this particular context, that the OPEC fund had looked at our portfolio, had said to us that they were comfortable with the IDB metrics. I would have called specifically the IDB. I would have indicated that the IDB metrics covered in particular two areas, one on gender and building our capacity there in being gender responsive. I would have also, Mr. President, have focused specifically on the amalgamation, so that the fund, Mr. President, that we are borrowing are not intended, Mr. President, to fund salaries. Mr. President, we're not printing money and borrowing money to pay salaries. That's not this government. That's not this government. But it's intended to help us to be able to address strategic priorities, overarching strategic priorities, Mr. President, and I would have identified those. I would have said, and I reiterate for those whose ears are again selective, I was very clear when I indicated, and I'm repeating again, that policy-based loan would then follow those IDB metrics that are in place. I would have indicated in that context, Mr. President, that we were happy with that arrangement, because as opposed to another partner coming and setting up another set of metrics, that we could have had then everybody being able to work on achieving and compound essentially this big objective within the social services sector, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also want to note that we are looking at the issue of agriculture and overall development. You know, it's always difficult because you have all these spurious things that come up within the discussion. And it would be interesting, I was saying to myself, that perhaps this government needs to have a record to show how much money we had to borrow to fix all of the things that we came into government to find broken. To find broken. To find that because of underinvestment and lack of care for the very people that they now pretend to care so much about, Mr. President. So much about, Mr. President, that we now have had to take up the mantle through our policies, again, through strategic mobilization of resources to be able to seek to address. And perhaps that is the scorecard that this government needs to be able to bring to the people, Mr. President. How much money we had to invest. Because that scorecard would show that a part of the debt that we had to repay was $407 million that we had to repay to clean up the CLICO mess, Mr. President. The scorecard would show that, because that's what we had to do, Mr. President. The scorecard would show that the investment includes something over $66 million that we have spent in road rehabilitation in Scotland District, Mr. President. The monuments that they scoff at and say we're spending money in monuments, I appreciate, Mr. President, they would not understand. I appreciate that they would not understand, because they don't understand nation building. They don't understand national identity and how to be able to do that. And how to be able to do that. The flapping curtains that they are talking about, Mr. President, provides opportunities for creatives to have performance space that they have not had. We said at the very beginning that the space needed further work. And, Mr. President, if you go up there today, you will find workmen that are there on the ground undertaking further work in order to reinforce the space, Mr. President. But again, I understand that people who are bereft of a strong nation-building ethos to know what it looks like, but have a difficulty making those sorts of connections, Mr. President. And so I rest that there. Because, Mr. President, I think that the majority of Barbadians know the difference. The majority of Barbadians know the difference between sounding symbols, Mr. President. The majority of Barbadians know. And certainly, Mr. President, the continual confidence that has been reposed in this government suggests that the Barbadian public understands the difference. Mr. President, I want to note as well that this government economic policies have become, in the international arena, in many instances, a standard bearer. Our introduction of natural disaster clauses, Mr. President, allowing and providing for fiscal space, is something that this government innovated about and which other countries are introducing. Our debt for nature clause as well, Mr. President, that allows this government to buy back its debt at a lower cost and then put that back into sustainable development, is also a standard bearer. This government continues to be able to innovate around how it mobilizes its finance, how it mobilizes capital to meet its critical development needs. But there are some of us, again, that cannot comprehend what good and sound policy management looks like. That the track record clearly shows that, and therefore their inability to be able to understand and comprehend is covered and to be covered by the continual beating of chest I'm bleating, Mr. President. And bleating. Mr. President, these two resolutions for these loans will provide critical resources in key areas. One, that policy-based loan, Mr. President, for Barbados, $100 million. Barbados, $100 million. The schedule, Mr. President, as I can see here, speaks to that loan in Barbados dollars, as well as the resolution, Mr. President, on Sinopharm, Barbados dollars, Mr. President. Both of these resolutions are intended to make sure that we can continue for the young people that were here, Mr. President, to be able to invest in the kind of Barbados, in the provision of health care for their parents, for themselves, for their children, that we invest in our social services, Mr. President, not at the micro level, but at the macro level, that we can take care of those things, Mr. President, that will allow us to then be able to reap long-term benefits. Mr. President, I beg to move that the resolution for the borrowing of the government of Barbados with the sum of Barbados $100 million from the OPEC Fund for International Development on the terms and conditions contained in the agreement be now passed.
The question is that order number 11, which is the resolution to approve the borrowing of the sum of 100 million Barbados dollars. We have two loans, each of $50 million from the OPEC Fund for International Development for program to strengthen social services. Do now pass. Will those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Mr. President, I beg to, sorry.
Of one building with an outpatient clinic, an outpatient ward, a burn unit, and a laboratory center known as Queen Elizabeth Hospital and more site, and extension lot 1 project, and B, one building with an oncology center and administration office and outside works known as Queen Elizabeth Hospital and more site extension 1 or 2 project.
Senator Maronite.
Mr. President, I beg to move that order number 12 for the passing in accordance with the provisions of the Special Loans Act, Cap 105, the borrowing of the government of Barbados with the sum of approximately Barbados $313.6 million from the China Sinopharm International Corporation on the terms and conditions contained in the agreement and as set out in the schedule for the design and construction of the building for an outpatient clinic, a patient ward, a burn unit, a laboratory center known as the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and Moore Site Extension Lot 1 project, and one building with an oncology center, an administrative office, and outside works known as the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and Moore Site Extension Lot 2 project be now passed.
The question is that this resolution, as indicated for Barbados won $313.6 million from China Sinopharm for the purposes of the two projects related to the extension of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Extension Lot 1 project and Extension Lot 2 project, do not pass. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Mr. President, that brings us to the end of government's business for today's sitting, and I want to thank all honourable members who have been here from the start of the day and they have remained here even now. I want to also take the opportunity to acknowledge the maiden contribution by Senator Connell and to congratulate him on his intervention. Mr. President, I beg to move at this time that the Senate do adjourn until Friday, December the 19th, 2025 at 11 a.m.
The question is that the Senate be adjourned until Friday, December 19th, 2025 at 11 a.m. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This Honourable Senate is therefore adjourned until Friday, December 19th, 2025 at 11 a.m.